Hello there folks, in this video we're going to be diving into another one of the new Battletomes for the new edition of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and in this case it is the Kharadron Overlords, the Sky Dwarves, the Sky Duardin, the Bubble Boys, the Bubble Beards perhaps I suppose you might say. Now I have always been a massive fan of dwarves over the years. I collected a fairly sizable 3, 4, 5,000 point army of dwarves back during the era of Warhammer Fantasy Battles. I suppose now you could say that it's also Warhammer the Old World. And so when it came to moving into Warhammer Age of Sigmar, I was obviously excited to see what they were going to do when it came to the dwarves in the Mortal Realms. Didn't end up going down the route of the dispossessed in the end. They looked too much like the original dwarves from Warhammer Fantasy for my liking when it came to the sort of new designs we were seeing for the likes of Cities of Sigmar later on down the line. I do have a reasonable sized collection of Fire Slayers because I do like my Slayers. And so having a Slayer army was something I always liked the idea of. And so I went down that route, and I have, a fair amount of those naked fellows with their lovely, lovely beards. But one of the armies that was a little bit Marmite for me, and I think a lot of people, was the Kharadron Overlords. I think there's something about them that I've slowly got used to overseeing them for the last little while, and that is that once you get to see a little bit more of their artwork and learn a little bit more about the lore behind them, they actually start to become a bit more of a faction that draws people in. I've never been a massive fan of the idea of having lots of vehicles, or in this case flyers, like their airships and stuff. And so that was a little bit of a turn-off, but I do actually quite like the design of a lot of their models. Some of them look a little bit weird, of which we'll talk about as we dive into the book itself. But there are a lot more things that I've been loving about them since we've got them for the new edition. And I have to say, there are some characters that are making me fall a little bit in love with the Kharadron Overlords, and making me think about the fact that it'd be quite fun to have a little detachment of them. Perhaps a Regiment of Renown, perhaps, that could be added to another force. That's a great way to go, and a nice way to mix things up if you're looking to add more models to your collection, but not in perhaps an entire army. One of the things that I really quite liked about, just in general, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, is the fact that they've actually been sort of pushing the envelope when it comes to the narrative. Unlike with Warhammer 40,000 for such a long time, and to an extent Warhammer Fantasy Battles, which were always very much at that minute to midnight moment, and I think to a degree still are. One of the nice things about Warhammer Age of Sigmar is because they've begun this essentially from, well, the beginning, they can tell an interesting story, and I think we've seen that through what we saw with the Realm Gate Wars in the first edition of the game, the Soul Wars as we moved into the second edition, and as we moved into third edition we also had the Era of the Beast and the coming of Kragnos and things like that, and now in the fourth edition we're seeing the Skaven and this rise of chaos throughout the realms. And this actually hit all of the different factions in different ways. And what I was particularly taken by was the fact that we actually had a little bit more of the movement and the storyline pushing on for the Kharadron Overlords. So one of the big things is that during this particular moment towards the end of third and the beginning of fourth, we had the fall of Barak-Urbaz, which in the wake of the Skaven assault upon Akshi and the realms, this sent waves spilling out across the various locations of the Mortal Realms and the various realms of Mortal Realms, and one such city that was under fire from all of this was Barak-Urbaz, which is the city you can see there, which has now fallen out of the sky and has crashed into the lands below it, which I think is a super cool idea, and certainly adds a little bit more to the hatred that the Kharadron Overlords have of the Skaven, which is more than ancestral at this point. This also made me think that there's some real potential for them to start telling some interesting stories when it comes to the Kharadron Overlords with this city. So we've always been considering the idea that there might be something fun to be done with a Mordheim-esque game for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And I think the fall of Barak-Urbaz could be that, because there's a lot of stuff in the lore behind this, that the city has fallen, and there's still quite a few Kharadrons still trying to not eke out a living, but try and reclaim lost technology from Barak-Urbaz and its ruins. But this has also then been overrun by Skaven and all that kind of thing as well. So if you were looking for a new City of the Damned, this would be a pretty good way for you to dive in and have some fun with it. One of the things about the Kharadron Overlords as well is that a lot of people will just see them as sky dwarves, but in actual fact, if you delve a little bit more into their details, there's some really fun bits and pieces, some really interesting lore about how they work and sort of how they fit into society. So unlike the Fire Slayers, who still revere Grimnir, and of course the Dispossessed, who are, you know, fans of Grungni and all that kind of thing, one of the interesting things about the Kharadron Overlords is that when they essentially fell during the Ages of Chaos and had to flee into the skies, yes, Grungni was a part of that, but one of the interesting things about that is that they've now kind of just almost forgotten about a reliance on the gods. They don't really put themselves in for prayers and magic and all that kind of things, and instead they rely on their own cunning and their own expertise, and that's where a lot of their technological advancements have come from. So they've become a lot... There are still, obviously, dwarves within the Kharadron Society who worship Grungni and Grimnir and Valyr and all the rest of them, all the different dwarves that are around in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. I don't think Valyr is still there, but there we go. And they still have his face plastered, you know, on the front of some of their ships and things like that. But for the vast majority of Kharadron Overlords, their real faith is in their technology and the way that they conduct themselves on the battlefield and in their trading endeavours. And I really like that with the Fire Slayers, we really got to see them nailing down the kind of, we are warriors of Grimnir, we follow that kind of Slayer Oath mentality, we charge out honourable, that kind of thing. With the Kharadron Overlords, they've really hammered home that idea of the runesmiths, not the runesmiths, the engineers, and to an extent the runesmiths, of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and the way that they approached technology, in that everything is codes, everything is written in the sort of diktats that they put together. There are books and books and books of ways that they can be like, actually, I think you'll find X or Y is the case with this scenario. And I really like that they've carried through that sort of minute detail that the dwarves used to put into everything they do in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and they've worked that into what we see here with the Mortal Realms. I do also like that we're starting to see more characters for the Kharadron Overlords. I should have mentioned, of course, this is me looking through 5 things and a bit that I love about a particular faction in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. We've always had Brock Grungson, who was the character that we've seen before, with his really funky, weird steampunk top hat floating around on his big balloon, as you can see there. But one of the characters that recently came into the mix was Drekki Flint. So Drekki Flint is a character who made something of a name for himself under Admiral Throck, but in doing so fell for his daughter. Alas, that did not go down well with the Admiral himself, so like any good self-respecting privateer, pirate, adventurer, plunderer, businessman, he has gone out of his way to make a name for himself in different ways, and so he flies around in his ship called the Aisling, which is named after the Admiral's daughter, and he takes his crew with him, and they go about plundering all that they can and telling interesting stories as they go. And I think this is one of the things that was really nice about what we've seen in the evolution between, I think, probably 2nd and 4th edition of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. We've just seen a lot more character and a lot more depth put into different factions, so they're not one-dimensional. Yes, you have these kind of trade magnates and engineers and code writes and things like that, but then you also have the adventurous side of the Kharadron Overlords, which is a fun way for you to start taking your armies if you're looking to build them. And of course, he comes with a black library book if you want to read more about Drekki Flint, which I think is pretty cool. Obviously, as I mentioned, they still have a lot of their quirky and weird characters, and this is where I start to see a little bit of a Marmite within them. Like, for example, I do really like the look of things like the Arcanaut Admiral, but the Null Chemist is a bit of a mystery to me. I'm not sure. Endrin Master, again, not sure. I don't mind the foot version. The Aether Chemist is cool, I guess, but I quite like the Etheric Navigator. So it's a little bit of a back and forth between what I actually quite like about the Kharadron Overlords and what I don't. I think the Code Writer is a perfect example of a great new miniature for this collection, with his books and rules that he's carrying with him everywhere, and it actually plays into the gameplay mechanics as well, which I think is quite fun. At the core of what I quite like about the Kharadron Overlords is things like their Arcanauts, as you can see there, which are their sort of privateers, their basic crew that they use on their ships. And this was one of the new things that they added into the mix for the Kharadron Overlords, which I'll get to in a second. As I did mention, the code rights are very, very cool, and I love that kind of element that they've worked into their lore, that they are sort of there to make sure that everything goes right, but they're also there to try and find all the vagaries in the code so that they can overrule things in favour of whoever they're working for within their trading partners. This was some of the new stuff that we saw added into the mix, which is the Vongrim Salvagers and the Vongrim Harpoon Crew. So these are, think of them as guildless, or they were guildless Duardin, who have been formed under Albus Merenson, who was a former up-and-coming captain who lost his own ironclad while fighting demons in the Shadrach Convergence. So what he decided to do was he would find those gaps within the lore, within the rules of the Kharadron Overlords, and he would use that as a way for him to create his own fleet. So, lacking money and supplies and all that kind of thing, him and the Vongrim Salvagers and their harpoon crews head out into the vastness of the realms, be that Shaman or somewhere else, the realm of metal, and they look for the broken husks of fleets that exist out there in the wild, and they cobble those together in a sort of Ship of Theseus-style affair to try and create their new vessels for use in the mortal realms and in their battles. So if you're going to do a kind of slapdash privateer style affair with your Kharadron Overlords, this is the way to go. And again, I really like that, and I like that we've got that kind of element of something a little bit different built into the Kharadron Overlords and how they work. And you can see a little bit about it here. So here's an example of a band of Vongrim Salvagers attempting to claim the wreckage there. I should say actually that they are sort of monster hunters as well. So they kind of like to look for the ships, and then they protect the crew as they're doing that by hunting down the monsters that are coming after them, which is quite neat. And yeah, other than that, the Kharadron are very much within the same wheelhouse as they've always been. They have very much a reliance on their ships. They're a big part of how they work. A lot of the way that you build your armies is sort of formed around them and some of the tactics that you use. So you will be using things like the gun haulers or the big ships that they have, like the frigates and the ironclads. You'll be using them as bases of activity to do your manoeuvring on the tabletop and the way that you move around in battle, which is no bad thing, and it creates an interesting alternative type of dwarf, of Duardin, for you to use in your games. You can see a lot more of their rules there about the use of sky vessels and things like that. I like the idea of doing them as gritty fortune hunters. I think is a great way of doing things. Go down that route, really hammer home the Vongrim harpoon crews and salvagers, and throw some fun stuff in there for when they're contesting objectives and things like that. 6+ ward save when contesting an objective doesn't feel particularly good. It's thematic, I suppose, but I wish it was better, which I think is the case with a lot of Warhammer Age of Sigmar rules. But yes, returning to Drekki Flint, as I did say, I do quite like him. He has some fun rules that you can dive into. So yes, he can be used alongside the rest of your Duardin force, and he does have an army of renown, which I suppose we should flick to and have a look at. Actually, it would be a good idea. So if we go boom, 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 and I believe it's there. So yes, this is one of the other things I wanted to talk about. Let's talk about Drekki first. So he's the captain of the Aisling. So he names one of his Archanaut frigates the Aisling, and that allows it to use all of its different keywords, as well as add one to the damage characteristic of the target's boarding weapons for the rest of the battle. He has the She Can Handle It rule, which is great. You can re-roll run rolls and charge rolls for the Aisling while it was wholly within 12 of this unit, and the auxiliary Skyhook. Pick an enemy monster in combat with this unit to be the target. Roll a d3, and on a 2+, inflict an amount of mortal damage on the target equal to the roll. Subtract 1 from room rolls made for the target's attacks for the rest of the turn. So a great way of shutting down something big. And as you might have imagined, he hunts down big things that are white and whale-like. They may have been influenced by Skaven, which is why they're so dangerous. But yes, throw him into the mix and have some fun with him. Switching over to his Regiment of Renown, as I mentioned, we do have one here that includes Drekki Flint. You get an Archanaut frigate, which becomes the Aisling, and then he has an Archanaut company of 10 models, and he gets his own set of special rules for you to use alongside that, in addition to what he already gets for being Drekki. And you can use him with a variety of the Order factions, as you can see there. Could be fun to throw in alongside things like the Stormcast Eternals and the Cities of Sigmar in particular. Although, of course, he could work with all manner of different factions to fill some gaps, and also potentially give you some ways to fill in the gaps within your own force, which I think is quite nice. But yeah, I think for the most part, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about this book is that we've got a lot of stuff in here to make different variants of a Kharadron Overlord's force. A lot of the stuff that has existed before is still in here. They've essentially just bulked out the army to give it a few more options. So you've got something else that you can do with the force when it hits the tabletop. It's always nice to have an element of choice. And it means that every time you're going to be coming up with against a Kharadron Overlord force, even within your, with your own collection, it'll probably look very different to somebody else's, which I think is always nice to see. There's still something you have to get your head around when it comes to the aesthetic of the models. I think now I've seen a lot more of them. I do quite like them. There's still something weird about the big bubble tanks of Aether Gold on their backs that I'm not entirely sure on. But, maybe if I had the models in my hand and was playing around with them, I'd find that they work quite nicely. I just think they look a little bit odd, a little bit too sci-fi as opposed to them being steampunky. Especially with some of them in their kind of weird, quirky stuff. Like, I don't mind a lot of the on-foot characters, but it's when they start to take to the air that I think it looks a bit odd. But then again, that is why some factions work for others, whilst they don't work for me. But there we go. Really nice ships as well. I would say that if you are diving into doing a Kharadron Overlords force, get yourself an airbrush. It'll make painting all of those models way easier. And to dry brush the hell out of things would be my other helpful tip that I would throw into the mix. They do have a brand new Spearhead, which I'm not sure on. I mean, it's cool that it comes with the Grundstock gun hauler and you get the Engine Master with the dirigible suit, but it feels a bit lacking a little bit. I know a lot of these Spearheads are actually quite balanced and they work very well, so it might just be a case that I haven't looked into it properly and sort of seen how it works, but, if you are looking for a new way to get into the Kharadron Overlords, you have that option there to get you started. As always, they still have all of their Path to Glory rules in there for you to build your various fleets, and you get some new tables, so the Path of the Magnate, the Path of the Privateer, and the Path of the Sky Fleet, which can be applied to your sky vessels rather than just your characters, which is nice. And then you have an Army of Renown, which is the Pioneer Outpost. That makes good use of the Zontari Endrin docks that we would have seen added into the mix recently, alongside things like the Volgrims. But then you also have the Magnate's crew, which is very much based around Brock Grungson, the Lord Magnate of Barak-Nar. So if you're looking to make a force based around him as a special character, then that's the way that you want to go. And of course you get your own battle traits, heroic traits and artifacts of power to do that with. My favourite is Drekki's Privateers, but I also quite like the Skyport Profiteers as well, with the Code Right and the 2 units of the Thunderers. I think it's a fun way to go out and sort of make your money, which I think is quite cool. And I love they've got some powerful abilities that come with them as well, that all are based on the Code Right. So that could be a fun little addition for you to play around with there too. But yeah, a nice little Battletome, one that definitely enlightened me to a little bit more about the Kharadron Overlords and sort of how they work and their lore and their background. I really like that we're seeing a few more variants of the Kharadron Overlords, so you can make thematic armies. Rules-wise, there's still lots of stuff in there that is fun for people who want to kind of do combo-style stuff on the tabletop. I'm very much more of a sort of theme and narrative person than I am a particular rules side of things. But there's definitely stuff in here for those people who want to go down the steampunky dwarf route. I will say, if you are interested in things like Kharadron Overlords and a lot more of the lore around some of the sort of fringe factions of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, I would heartily recommend diving into things like Warhammer Age of Sigmar Soulbound, which is the role-playing game that comes from Cubicle 7. It is exceptionally good, and they've done a stunning job of expanding the lore and the background for the Mortal Realms. But yeah, that is my 5 or so things that I quite like about the new Kharadron Overlords Battletome for Warhammer Age of Sigmar and the current edition of the game. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you like the Sky Dwarves? Are you a fan of the miniatures? Do you hate the miniatures? Are you somewhere in between? Are they growing on you? Are they floating on you? I suppose. Maybe. But yes, drop all your thoughts into the comments down below. Let me know what you think. Like, share, subscribe, do all of that good stuff, and I'll be back in the very near future with even more videos for all the things that I like in gaming. So yes, thank you very much, folks, and I'll see you very, very soon. Bye for now.